Hi, everybody. Welcome in to a special edition of BetSided's Bet and Breakfast. I'm Ben Heisler, managing editor over at BetSided. You might see some faces that you may not have seen before. And if that's the case, then you are actually, in fact, in the right place. We're joined today by three outstanding writers, insiders, contributors, editors over in the FanSided network. I'm excited to introduce them and bring them on because there is a direct connection for everybody here with regards to Super Bowl 56. Bengals and the Rams. Rams, of course, 4-point favorites over at WynnBET Sportsbook with a total hovering around 48.5. And rather than just hear from the guys that you know over at BetSided, I wanted to bring in actual experts, insiders. One from the National Football side, and that's Matt Lombardo, our national FanSided NFL insider. We also have Leigh Oleszczak, the editor for FanSided and Stripe Hype, and then also Bret Stuter, over at Ramblin Fan. He's their site expert as well. So we're covering the Super Bowl from all four different avenues. And so I guess where I want to kick off, and first of all, I'm grateful to have all of you guys here. Let's talk about the actual line here, because it's 4 points. It's basically been hovering right around that number from the moment that things kicked off a couple Sundays ago. Started at 3.5, worked all the way up to 4.5 for maybe a quick jump in a second. And now it's been sitting at around 4 points for most of the week. So, Bret, I'm going to start things off with you knowing the Rams as well as you do. They've been a bit of an up and down team, but certainly they've played some of their best football this postseason. Do you think they deserve a 4-point favorite tag? Do you think that's a fair number in this type of matchup at this time?
I do, even though this year the anomaly of the Super Bowl is that the Rams are a visitor at their own SoFi Stadium. I think that they've been a very accomplished team this year. They were 12-5 in this regular season. They had to blow through the Arizona Cardinals, the San Francisco 49ers, and the defending Super Bowl champs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And through the entire season, they had a lot of adversity. And so the challenges that they've overcome, I think, makes them a much stronger team. I think 4 is about where I would put them here. Anything can happen. The line is set that it tries to tempt as many people to jump on the underdog as a favorite. But if the number was 7 or better, I would definitely stay away. If it were even odds or below, I would be all over the Rams with probably the mortgage. But 4 is a good number.
So, Leigh, let me transition that to you next. Do you look at the Bengals and say, based on their road to get to where they are, and think about some of the teams that they've beaten along the way. They've survived 9 sacks from the Tennessee Titans. They go into Kansas City. They're down by 3 touchdowns and find a way to come back in this game. Do they view themselves as the underdog here? Do you look at this number and say, yeah, they probably should be giving up maybe 3-4 points or so?
I'm not surprised to see them as underdogs. They've been underdogs this whole time, and I don't think they really care. They were, 7-point underdogs to the Chiefs, and like you said, they were down 3 touchdowns, came back and won that game. And the week before, I think they were, 4-point underdogs to the Titans, and they went in and they beat the number 1 seed in the AFC. This team's used to being the underdog. I don't think that – Joe Burrow even said it a few weeks ago. He's like, I'm tired of us saying that we're the underdogs. We're a good team. And I think the line's a little disrespectful. I think – I know LA, it's in LA and all that, but I would say more Rams either a point or even make it even. I think the Bengals got just as good of a shot as anyone in this one.
All right, so that leads me into you, Matt, because I remember I saw your tweet over when the lines initially came out. What was your first impression of it, and did you expect it to go in a certain direction or kind of where it is now?
Yeah, I think that this is probably pretty close to where it's going to end up on Super Bowl Sunday, because I think that you look at the Rams and you look at Sean McVay, such an accomplished play caller with a quarterback in Matthew Stafford who really seems like he's tailor-made for the route concepts of that offense and what they like to do. But I'm kind of with Leigh here, because you look at Joe Burrow's track record as a quarterback, you look at the weapons at wide receiver. It's not just Jamar Chase. When Jamar Chase is taken away, if he is by Jalen Ramsey, you still have T. Higgins. You still have Tyler Boyd. You have a dominant downhill running game in Joe Mixon that I had a coordinator tell me that the way to beat the Rams and neutralize their pass rush with Leonard Floyd and Von Miller and Aaron Donald is to kind of gouge them with the run, which Joe Mixon is plenty capable of doing. He rushed for 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns during the regular season. So this is a team that can really kind of counteract what the Rams do best. But with that said, it just seems like nationally, the feel about this game going in is that the Rams, with everything they did this year, going all in, bringing in Von Miller at the deadline, signing Odell Beckham Jr., who they're not in this game if it's not for Odell, with Matthew Stafford at quarterback, with that dominant defense, with a really good offensive line. I think the sentiment nationally is the Rams are deservedly favorites, but I'm leaning Bengals going into this game and going into how I would place my bet on this game if I were a betting man.
All right, so you brought up a lot of compelling points. And Leigh, I want to go back to you on this because the conversation and the narrative leading up to this point has been everything that Joe Burrow has accomplished, right? But that brings up a really good point that you can find some soft spots and try to take away some of that Rams pressure. And Bret, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well. But Leigh, let me start with you there. Do you think the Bengals go into this game maybe focusing a little bit more on getting Mixon some early touches, trying to neutralize that pass rush on the earlier side, and perhaps that takes some pressure off of Burrow in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that they should do. Mixon hasn't really had the kind of postseason that I think a lot of Bengals fans were expecting him to after having, as Matt said, he had a very good season. And that would be the smart thing, have Burrow get the ball out quickly. If it's not just handing it off to Mixon, at least getting the ball to him, on short passes. I think that that's the way that they should go. Will they? Who knows? We'll have to see.
What about for you, Bret? Do you feel like that's an opportunity for the Rams to at least feel like they're maybe losing an opportunity here if the Bengals end up going heavy on the ground in the first half, try to establish some time, some pace, and really kind of take away that ability for Aaron Donald and the rest of that front four, Von Miller included, to just pin their ears back and go?
Well, nothing I'm hearing here isn't something that we haven't heard all season. Starting from the Green Bay Packers in the divisional round last year, everybody knew that the way that you beat the Rams was you sort of dink and dunk, you attack the middle of their defense, and you play the patient game. Try to force Sean McVay to get impatient, take his shots, get reckless. But it didn't work for any of the teams in the playoffs this year. I mean, the Arizona Cardinals went in knowing how to beat the Rams and couldn't do it. Tampa Bay Buccaneers went in knowing how to beat the Rams and couldn't do it. As the San Francisco 49ers, who have beaten the Rams 6 times straight, went into the playoffs and couldn't do it. I mean, I hear you. I hear that Joe Mixon is due for a good game. But the reality is that it's an awful harder for you to deliver on that big game when you got the legs of Greg Gaines, Ashawn Robinson, and Aaron Donald breathing down your neck. There's a risk if the Bengals offensive line can keep the Rams away from the running lanes, but there's a big if. The Bengals offensive line hasn't done a very good job this year. And even as we talk about Joe Burrow and the incredible production that he's gotten, great poise out of a very young quarterback, the key in my mind is how strong will the Rams offense be against that very surprising, effective Bengals defense. It's the defense that has kept them in the game in my mind.
So let me go to you on this one, Matt. When you saw the different ways that Cincinnati last week in particular adjusted, and what's so remarkable to me is that they did this 2 consecutive games against Kansas City, overcame a 14-point deficit back in week 17, did it again with a 3-possession lead where the Chiefs scored on their first 3 possessions and did so very easily. Are we not talking enough, perhaps from a national perspective, about just how good and how opportunistic this Bengals defense is, especially when it comes to making changes and necessary changes, particularly in the second half?
Oh, no, I'm totally on board with you there, because it's not just what happened in Kansas City, but what they did in Tennessee. Because if they don't intercept that pass late in the fourth quarter, they don't give Joe Burrow the ball back to make that 34-yard throw to Jamar Chase to put them in position to kick the game-winning field goal on the road. And I think that what really compounded the Chiefs' issues last week was Patrick Mahomes has struggled through his career when you drop 7 or 8 men into coverage. The Bengals did that about halfway through the second quarter onward. And not only did Patrick Mahomes make some mistakes in that game that were kind of uncharacteristic, but Andy Reid never made the counter adjustment to run the ball, play ball control, and kind of stop the onslaught that you saw out of Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals last week. And I thought it was fascinating reading Peter King's column on Monday morning. The anecdote about Joe Burrow going to Zach Taylor, I think it was midway through the third quarter, early fourth quarter. And he told Taylor, look, if the Chiefs are giving me this look on defense in a big spot, I want T. Higgins at this spot. I want him running a route that's this deep, cutting him off at this yard line. And that just shows me that Joe Burrow is playing the game above the shoulders at a different level than a lot of quarterbacks around the NFL. And that's where when I look at this game on Sunday, I think there's a really good chance that it plays out a lot similarly to what we saw in Tennessee, where the pass rush is relentless. Burrow got sacked 9 times. That could happen again. It could happen again when you're going up against the likes of Von Miller, Leonard Floyd, and that front seven. But Joe Burrow is just so intelligent in terms of manipulating defenses. He's used to the moment that if you give him the ball back down by 3, down by 6, inside of a minute to go, I don't think that game is over.
No doubt. And Leigh, I know you had something that you wanted to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Matt was saying, the Bengals gave up 9 sacks in that game, and they still somehow won. Now, I know the Rams' pass rush is a lot better than the Titans, and they're a much better team overall than the Titans. But that is something that the Bengals know. They know, hey, we can win if our offensive line plays like garbage. And I think that that's a big thing for them to know going into this game.
Yeah, there's a lot of confidence there. I mean, we saw that, from the Kansas City side, their ability to come back in games when they won the, I was about to say the World Series. I was thinking about the baseball labor dispute. No, the Super Bowl, of course, a couple of years ago, down 24-0 against Houston in the divisional round, and ended up outscoring them, I think 48-10.
And Patrick Mahomes did it in the Super Bowl against the San Francisco 49ers that year as well in the fourth quarter. And you can go back to this playoff run. Patrick Mahomes, with 13 seconds left, drives the Chiefs down into position. So Patrick Mahomes certainly is as clutch as they come, is as gifted as they come. But Joe Burrow, I believe, wins with the way that he identifies coverages, with how quickly he gets rid of the football. Because as a scout told me this week in my column, he doesn't have the ability to make some of the throws that Patrick Mahomes makes. But he wins in clutch moments with decision-making and quickness.
Well, one of the things I think we're missing on this is that we keep focusing on the Bengals offense. But if you take a look at the scores of those games, there was no runaway freight train. The defense held. I don't know that that's the case with this Rams offense. I mean, if you take a look at the bottom line, the Bengals rush defense was horrid. They gave in each game over 5 yards per carry. The quandary was, why did any of the offenses that they faced stopped running the ball? I don't think that the Rams are going to do that. I think that the Rams have learned over time that their offense requires a balanced attack. They're going to give you 30 plus. So that's going to be, if they maintain that same balance, 150 yards plus on the ground. And if you can give that to a Matthew Stafford, he's gone. You're going to get 30 points out of that offense easily. And I think that in a shootout match, I think that the Rams line up very nicely with the Bengals on this one.
All right, so let me go back to one final thought, Brad, because there's still so much that we want to be able to dive into. But we've had the conversation about Joe Burrow in the early portion of the show, and I know there'll be plenty more about him throughout the course of today, as well as through the rest of the week. But when we were recording a lot of our BetSided content this week, it keeps coming back to that those on the Bengals side keep saying, I'm just waiting for Matthew Stafford to make that inevitable mistake. If we go back and look at how he's actually done this postseason and really throughout the course of the season, Stafford has the best completion percentage in the NFL against the blitz this year. And what I've found remarkable is that the 49ers didn't blitz him at all. They only blitzed him, I think, 6 times total over the course of this game. And when they did not blitz him, that's when he picked them apart. It was almost the opposite of what we've seen from Stafford collectively over the course of the season. Are we letting the narrative of Stafford making that bad throw maybe take over for those that are backing the Bengals? Is that too much a narrative play, or is that something that Sean McVay needs to consider in creating a game plan where you can take advantage of a Bengals rush defense that's been suspect throughout the course of the year? You have multiple options with Cam Akers now back. Are we looking at the Rams maybe as saying they're going to be aggressive with Stafford? He's going to have to win them the game, or are we looking at it from a different perspective where they're probably going to be a little bit more run heavy than we think?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes hand in hand, the run game and what Matthew Stafford has been able to do versus his propensity for turnovers. I had a coordinator in the NFL tell me this week that, the key to beating the Rams is stopping the run, not just to take Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson out of the game, but because everything that the Rams do, everything that Stafford does really well, comes off of play action. So if you eliminate the threat of the run, all of a sudden you eliminate a significant chapter of Sean McVay's playbook. And, my sense is that you look at that game in the NFC Championship game, and for 45 minutes, Matthew Stafford played above his head, but he had a dropped interception that was basically a punt that if that gets picked off, you're talking Bengals 49ers in this game. And you're talking about Kyle Shanahan's opportunity to write his redemption story after that fourth quarter collapse against the Chiefs, and not Sean McVay's after that really disappointing Super Bowl performance against the New England Patriots. So I think that the big mistake by Matthew Stafford is kind of what's hovering over the Rams offense. It's just a matter of, can they run the ball effectively enough to take the pressure off of him and then open it up downfield to guys like Cooper Kupp and Van Jefferson and Odell Beckham Jr., which is a heck of a trio of wide receivers to have at your disposal.
No doubt.
I'm not convinced. From what I've seen in the way the Rams offense has been constructed so far, is it whether or not the Rams offense gets positive yards out of the running game. It's more a matter of just getting the number of carries. If you take a look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Rams offense on a good running offense, they never showed up, but they did commit to the run, which gave them the ability to rest their defensive starters. If you take a look against the Minnesota Vikings, Stafford and the offense turned over the ball 3 times, but they still won the game because they committed to a running game. The running game wasn't necessarily incredibly effective, but it was enough. And right now, I think that that's all the Rams need in this offense is to get a 30-plus carries to keep the defense rested, to keep Stafford off the hook for always having to make the plays. If he's pass, he will eventually make the mistakes. But if you intermingle a few runs here or there, I think that the offense will develop very organically and naturally, and he'll take his shots, and they will make some very positive yards.
Yeah, if you can have a situation like what you saw in the game against Arizona, where I think they ran it 37 times and maybe Stafford passed it. I have to double check the numbers exactly, but I think it was only maybe about 20 or so times. It was very run heavy, but it opened up play action, like you said, and he was still able to complete some deep field shots to Beckham, to Kupp in the process. I think that sets up very, very well for them. It's just a matter of whether or not the Bengals will let them do it and if they make those adjustments. I want to get your thoughts on the number one matchup. And we've talked about it a little bit, whether or not the Rams defensive line, how they're going to handle against the Bengals offensive line, whether Bro can get it out quick. Jalen Ramsey, perhaps who he ends up shadowing in the process. Is it going to be Chase? Is it going to be Higgins? Is he going to mix and match where they move him on the field? So Leigh, let me start with you. Give me the matchup, whether it's player versus player, line versus line, coach versus coach, whatever you want that maybe stands out the most to you ahead of Super Bowl 56.
Well, I mean, the obvious ones, the Bengals O-line versus the Rams D-line. And I'm going to go a little deeper. I think Aaron Donald against the revolving door that is the right guard position and Trey Hopkins at center, that could get pretty ugly pretty fast. And so that's what I'm going to be watching for. If they can even somewhat limit him, they've got a really good chance to win this game. But I don't know that that's going to happen. That side of the line's been an absolute dumpster fire this year.
What about for you, Brad? Where do you see the more intriguing matchup amongst many in the Super Bowl?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't hear the name. I'm going to take Lee's answer, but flip it. I'm going to say that the Rams offensive line against the Bengals defensive line. One of the things that, if you take note, the Bengals have been notoriously effective at getting to the quarterbacks throughout the playoffs so far. But I like their even front because their best pass rushers happen to be against the Rams' best offensive linemen, Andrew Whitworth and Rob Havenstein. if you can get enough blocking to protect Stafford from the offensive line, I think that the Rams have a very good day. It's a very big if. Rams will have to use tight ends, chip at them with some running backs, maybe get some double teams going. But I like the way it lines up for the Rams right now.
All right, so we've got it in the trenches. We're going offensive line, defensive line from both of our site insiders with the Bengals and the Rams. What about for you, Matt? Are you looking at the lines as well, or are we looking at some of the skill positions, maybe the quarterbacks or coaches? Where's your thought process at as far as the matchup that you think is going to be the most intriguing?
Yeah, big picture, I think, guys, this is going to be one in the trenches. But I'll go a different avenue here because I think there's another wrinkle to this. It's, can the Bengals replicate the success running the football that they had against the Kansas City Chiefs early in the game? Because I'm kind of with Bret here, that I don't know that the Bengals want this thing to devolve into a track meet. I don't think that they want it to be a shootout where it's 37-34, especially because in those situations, you can kind of pin your ears back and blitz the quarterback. So I think for the Bengals to have any success, they're going to have to really establish the run early on, try to play downhill, try to dictate to the Los Angeles Rams, kind of get Von Miller and Aaron Donald playing back on their heels a little bit. And if they're able to run the ball early, and especially if they start winning the time of possession early and kind of shorten this game, I really like their chances here. But if Joe Mixon gets stuffed and that offensive line gets overwhelmed, they can pin their ears back. I don't know that Joe Burrow is going to be able to overcome that sort of onslaught of pressure that he did against Tennessee without having the offense operating on all cylinders in all phases.
All right. All of those really compelling matchups. I'm going to also go sort of on the skill position side. I think whoever Jalen Ramsey ends up matching up against is going to be fascinating because there's so many different avenues that Matt Stafford can then try to, or excuse me, that Joe Burrow has to try to determine. So if Ramsey locks up Chase, are you trusting Higgins to make some plays downfield? I think Tyler Boyd is in a really interesting spot. I went back. This was remarkable. Pro Football Focus mentioned that the last time Tyler Boyd dropped the ball in the slot, you have to go all the way back to week 2 of, I think, the 2020 or 2021 season. It's been pretty much 2 years since Tyler Boyd has dropped a pass, and he's been the third option on this team throughout the course of the year. But when he's reliable and Burrow needs to get the ball out quick, it's not Cooper Kupp in the slot, but you're talking about a very solid weapon. And Ramsey also has shown the capability of locking other wide receivers down in the slot as well. You can really move him anywhere you want to go. So I think Tyler Boyd, and I know Reed Wallach over at BetSided had mentioned this a little bit early on this week. You can actually find that video right here on our YouTube page. But he talked about how that's going to be one of his favorite props this week is the over on Tyler Boyd receptions. And the yardage play over at WinBet is right now at 38.5. Something to consider, especially if Burrow has to get the ball out quick, knowing that the guy that he's used to throwing the ball to downfield and Chase is going to be covered up in the process. But I think that's a matchup for me that I'm very excited about. And I think there's an opportunistic play on the prop bet market as well, which actually kind of leads into a fun conversation for this part of it, guys. When we're talking about players that we expect to have a big game, maybe players that we expect to struggle. And Bret, I'll go ahead and start with you on this one on the Rams side. Is there somebody that you expect to have a monster game, a really standout performance, somebody that we might be talking about as a potential for Super Bowl MVP? And then maybe on the flip side, is there somebody either on the Rams or on the Bengals that you anticipate struggling in this game as well?
Well, my go-to guy in this one is Kendall Blanton. I expect that he will make a touchdown at some point in the game. So I would make that one of my bets on this one because if you take a look at the way the Bengals defense has run this year, they've been very susceptible to the opposing team's tight ends. Doesn't look like Tyler Higbee is going to be a go. And I think that may actually work to the Rams' advantage. If you're going to prepare for the Rams and you've got the likes of Odell Beckham Jr., Van Jefferson, and Cooper Kupp facing off against you, there's not going to be a whole lot of focus on Kendall Blanton, who already has scored a touchdown against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I like how he may impact the game in this one. as far as who the Rams may have struggling, I think that Taylor Rapp coming back as a safety off of a concussion protocol, he's very good in run support. He has those flashes of brilliance, but in terms of overall pass coverage, very vulnerable. And I think that the Bengals may be able to exploit him if they target his position in their pass routes.
Rapp is interesting. I would imagine that if some of these numbers come in over at WinBet, he might be a sneaky bet for Super Bowl MVP because he and Ramsey both led the Rams in interceptions this year with 4. As to your play on Blanton, I was thinking, all right, there's so many different options. And everyone's going to be on Cup. There's going to be a lot of conversation about Beckham as far as their opportunity to score a touchdown. I just went and looked at the odds over at WinBet. Kendall Blanton at plus 230. So you would win $230 on a $100 bet if you were to score a touchdown anytime. So a little bit lower than I actually anticipated for somebody like Blanton that I think the casual fan may not know about. So I think you might be on the sharp side here, Brett. I think you might have seen that number move just a tad with some action coming in on Kendall Blanton. All right, Matt, let me go to you. Give me a player that you think will likely exceed expectations and maybe somebody on the other side that you expect to struggle.
Yeah, I think Odell Beckham Jr. is a guy that could exceed expectations in this game, especially if you look at the Bengals. If they're going to have to shade a safety to Cooper Kupp's side of the field to double team him to avoid those big plays after the catch and those big plays over the top, 60-plus yards for Odell Beckham Jr. seems like it could be a pretty easy number to hit for Odell. So I think that he might exceed expectations, especially everything that's going on through his career. You know what this moment means to him. You know what he's meant to this offense since his arrival. And a guy that I think could kind of not live up to expectations, I think it's Ja'Marr Chase. And it's not because I think Ja'Marr Chase isn't going to have a big game. I spoke to a head coach this week for my column who told me point blank, Jalen Ramsey can't cover Ja'Marr Chase. But I think we saw last week in Kansas City that even if Chase is neutralized a little bit, Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor aren't afraid to go to Tyler Boyd. They aren't afraid to go to a T. Higgins. They aren't afraid to target a CJ Uzomah, who's a big part of that offense when he's healthy. And it looks like he's going to be healthy. So if people are piling in on Ja'Marr Chase because of his history with Burrow and because of, his big numbers, what he did in Kansas City in the regular season, what he did throughout the regular season, basically clinching Offensive Rookie of the Year early on, the Bengals have a lot of secondary options that they aren't afraid to involve early and often. So my guy to exceed expectations is Odell. And the guy who might come up a little bit small in terms of people's expectations for the game is Ja'Marr Chase.
All right, so Beckham currently is set for 5 over at WinBet when it comes to total receptions. The over has a little bit more juice to it at minus 120 odds compared to the under of 5 and minus 110. If you're looking at Ja'Marr Chase, there's some pretty heavy action on him hitting his over, which is at 5.5. But I'm with you there. I think there's actually value on the under for Chase because even if he breaks a big play, if Ramsey's on him the bulk of the time, he might have a game where you have 4 catches for 82 yards and he breaks the yardage amount that you see for him over at WinBet, which is currently at 80.5. So I'm with you there. I think Beckham is a very intriguing play because Cooper Kupp is already going to get his prop number, you guys, 106.5 yards and 8.5 receptions. So to me, I almost think it cancels out his opportunity to win MVP because if Cooper Kupp has 9 receptions for 107 yards, that's what the odds makers expected him to do. Whereas most wide receivers, you think, hey, that's a hell of a game. That's a great performance in a Super Bowl. Nope, that's what you have to get out of Cooper Kupp. What about for you, Lee? Who's a player that you think could exceed expectations and maybe another that you expect to fall a little bit below par?
I'll actually start with who I think could struggle because you just talked about Cooper Kupp. I think Chidobe Awuzie from the Bengals, if he's tasked with covering Kupp, he did well in the second half of the Chiefs game covering Tyreek Hill, and I think that that's something that the Bengals have been good at is making those adjustments when they need to, but he got cooked by A.J. Brown in that Titans game, and it could be rough. If he's tasked with being on Kupp all by himself, that's probably not going to go very well. So he's somebody I could definitely see struggling, at least in the first half if they don't make adjustments. Player who I think is going to do well, or at least who I hope does well, is Tyler Boyd. You were talking about him earlier, Ben. I like Boyd a lot. I think he's been in a really unique situation this year. He went from being the top receiver in the Bengals offense. And then they got T. Higgins and they got Jamar Chase. He's now the third stringer, and he's a very good third stringer, but I feel like a lot of guys in his situation wouldn't have been so nice about it. They would have probably wanted to be traded, and he's been a great leader through all this, and I just want to see him succeed. So I hope he does well.
All right, so we got Tyler Boyd back in on a possible overplay. It just makes too much sense for Burrow to look his way in this game. So I definitely envision that scenario happening as well. All right, before we get out of here, and all of you guys have been super generous with your time. I know that all of our listeners and our viewers here at BetSided are super grateful for the additional insight that we can help provide before you get your wagers in ahead of Super Bowl 56. We're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to go Leigh, Matt, and Bret. Give me your best bet for the Super Bowl. Are you taking a team straight up on the money line? Are you going for a prop? Are you taking the Bengals +4 or the Rams -4? Or maybe you're looking over under on that total points of 48.5. So Leigh, kicking things off with you. Great opportunity to get that best bet in a little bit early before the game. Where you heading?
I like the Joe Burrow rushing yards. I think it's set at 11.5 last I looked. He's had to scramble a lot last week in Kansas City. And that's just something that he's been good at through the playoffs. And with the O-line maybe not holding up as well as they would hope, I think he's going to be running quite a bit in this game, whether he wants to or not. I think that's one you can safely hit the over on.
All right. You and I are, we're simpatico on that one. That was my favorite prop that I talked about earlier this week. Yeah, it's -125 odds over at WinBet, but very much an advocate that Burrow is going to take off, especially once he saw some of that coverage. And Matt, you mentioned the Peter King column. He talked about it with Zach Taylor too. Designed runs and extending plays on third down. That was critical for the Bengals, especially in the second half. So I don't think he's going to hesitate to be able to leave the pocket if he knows that he can make a play. And remember, Burrow back in college, that was part of his game too. Him and Vince Young were the only two quarterbacks in college football history in the championship game to throw for 250, run for 50 yards, and then also have a rushing touchdown. And Burrow did that in the first half of that game of the national championship as well. All right, Matt, Super Bowl bet, your best bet for the game. What's it going to be?
I think it's Joe Mixon rushing yards, and I think you got to pound the over here because, Zach Taylor showed early on in Kansas City, they weren't afraid to run the ball on early downs, even when they were behind. So you look at his total going into this game, 63.5 yards is the over-under at WinBet. This screams over to me. This is a guy who produced over 1,200 rushing yards during the regular season, only averaging 3.7 yards per carry in the postseason. But he had his biggest game against the Tennessee Titans. And I think there are a lot of parallels. I mentioned it earlier in this game for the Bengals as you can draw to that game against the Titans. Dominant front seven, an onslaught of a pass rush. And I think that you saw Mixon become a focal point of the game plan in that game. That's when he scored his only touchdown. I think he has his largest yardage output of the postseason against the Rams in the Super Bowl. So give me the 63.5 over for Joe Mixon in this game.
Love it. 63.5 on Joe Mixon. It's actually the same number of rushing yards that is projected for Cam Akers as well. So a very intriguing separate side prop bet, if you will, of who will have more rushing yards between Akers and Mixon in that game. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And furthermore, I think it goes with your point too, Matt, that, if you're leaning towards the Bengals, it's expecting Joe Mixon to be able to have a dominant game, and that's going to allow Cincinnati to remain on the field, keep Joe Burrow protected. So I think it lines up very well with the direction that you're going in. All right, Bret, close this out. I'm curious as to whether or not you'll have a Bengals play compared to both Leigh and Matt. I would imagine it'll likely be on the Rams side, but we'll never know until you tell us.
Well, I'm going to give you a 2-4 because everybody's been so patient for my responses. The first one is I'm going to tell you to take Cam Akers with a 63.5 over on the yardage. If you have noticed that as soon as Cam Akers came back from a miraculous recovery of Achilles tendon, he's been the guy. I would have thought that they would have kept running with Sony Mitchell, but it's very clear that Sean McVay wants Cam Akers to run. And in this game, he will run, and he'll run over 25 times himself, and he will get somewhere very close to the 100, 120 mark. So go 63.5 over. I love the Rams running game in this one. And then for the finance in me, the accountant past life, I'm going to play the safe bet and say take the money line and the Rams to win. Give up the money but take the sure thing. And this, in my mind, feels like the Rams' destiny. You can look at a lot of things that are very positive about the Bengals, but we've got Andrew Whitworth and Eric Weddle, and this is their last stand. And when you're up against that kind of manifest destiny, got to go with the Rams on this one.
Minus 195 on the Rams money line. So you'd be laying 195 to win 100, but there is plenty of confidence coming from you, Bret. So hard to
Brett's
disagree
betting the
with.
mortgage. He's betting the mortgage on the Rams. There's lots of confidence.
Not the mortgage. Not the mortgage. I'll put 195 down.
Fair enough. So somewhere in between the mortgage and the safe accounting play as well in this game. I think you're going to have a lot of fun regardless. And listen, I'm on the Rams side as well. I like them at -4. My favorite play is actually on the under in this game. I expect this to be a bit more of a run-dominated game between both sides. I do expect Burrow to be running for his life. And I kind of envision a similar scenario to what we saw both last year in the Super Bowl, where Mahomes was running away from Tampa Bay's front four, and also in Super Bowl 50, where Denver's looked absolutely dominant on the defensive side and really sent Cam Newton into a frenzy. But that game was actually a little bit closer than most anticipate. So I like the under on 48.5. Try to tail in on that movement at the very beginning of the week when it opened up at 50-51 at some other sports books. But guys, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed the perspective, getting a chance to learn a little bit more about each team and also get the national perspective as well. Leigh Oleszczak, editor for FanSided and Stripe Hype, Matt Lombardo, our national NFL insider over at FanSided, and Bret Stuter over at Ramblin Fan, their site expert as well. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This was an absolute pleasure, and appreciate all of you guys being a part of Bet and Breakfast, and may all of your bets hit regardless of what ultimately happens in the Super Bowl. So great to see all of you guys.
Appreciate you. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.